I'll just officially welcome us to, the April 2024 edition of our TEP webinar series. I'm really delighted to have you join us today, and I'm very sure that more people will join as we proceed with the webinar today. So my name is Motunrayo, and I'll be your host in today's webinar. And so I'm just going to recap what we discussed in the last webinar, which was in March. We discussed the African Union's Year of Education, where we streamlined on the topic of ensuring that African children have access to education. So in today's webinar, we're also going to be pushing that further, but however, we're going to be streamlining it to public-private partnerships. Also in line with the theme of the African Union Year, which is the Year of Education in 20 of Education was declared the Year of Education. So please, wherever you're joining in from, would love to know where you're joining in from, your name, your organization, and what you hope to learn in today's webinar. And just put it in the comment section below and would see it. And you can also interact with anyone, try to network with people who are also joining in from different parts of the world today. So my job this morning is to briefly introduce us to the NICE community. NICE stands for National Innovation Collaborative for Education. And NICE is a community of education innovators who are committed to increasing access to quality education for all children. And it's also curated by TEP Center. NICE, our NICE community, we currently engage the following channels, and I'm just going to list them below. We have our monthly newsletter where we share opportunities and also platform for us to collaborate with other people. We've had to collaborate with PhD students, and it was really, really vibrant. So that's one of the ways we collaborate in our NICE community. We also have our podcast, Education Unscripted. And then we also have our virtual and in-person meetups, one of which is this TEP webinar series that we're currently hosting. So the webinar series has explored themes highlighted in previous edition of NEDIS. And so we would love to collaborate with you. And in order to do this, you just need to send us an email at nice@tepcenter.com. And I'm sure one of my colleagues will be dropping all of these links in the comment section below. And we also have EdMeet, which is also under NICE, a bridge builder event. It's designed to provide a platform for education and other sector experts to collaborate and synergize for the purpose of solving complex problems and also strengthening access to quality education using this same platform. So like in our previous editions, we've hosted EdMeet Tech. We've also hosted EdMeet Foundational Learning. And in our next EdMeet event, we are hoping to host EdMeet Climate Change. The NICE community is an outcome of the Annual Education Innovation Summit, which is our NEDIS event. It's also hosted by the Education Partnership Center, and it was established in 2016. NICE is a budding community designed to facilitate continuous learning and collaboration. The 7th edition of NEDIS was held in October 2022. I know some of us, Miss Tonia was also part of the October 2022 edition, and it was themed Reimagining Education Development in Africa, Bridging the Skills Gap. The summit focused on how to recalibrate education, innovation, and development to ensure that all children and young people are fully equipped to thrive in life and contribute meaningfully to the society. So in recent events from the pandemic to insecurity to flooding, all of these changes and disruptions are shown that not all children have the opportunity to pass through the traditional classroom. How do we ensure that children are not forgotten but still gain access to quality education? That's why the 8th edition of our NEDIS Education Innovation Summit will focus on sustainability and education innovation. So please join our mailing list to stay updated on this event. I can't see the chat box at the moment, but I'm sure that you will also get the links in the chat box like the way I'm talking. So before we move into the webinar fully, I would like to introduce our moderator to us in no other person than Ms. Chinwe Ifechiga. And she's going to introduce our speakers to us and also lead us into the panel discussion. But before I pass the floor to her, I would like to just share a brief summary of who she is and what she does. So Ms. Chinwe Ifechiga is a fellow of the Sustainability Professional Institute of Nigeria. She's also a fellow of the Institute of Strategic Management of Nigeria. Ms. Chinwe also holds a master's degree in international relations and strategic studies. She's also an alumni of the Lagos School Management Program. She has over 24 years cognate experience in the energy industry, spanning across various career fields in a multinational organization. And as the sustainability manager, Ms. Chinwe steers the affairs of sustainability and corporate social responsibility in Total Energies Marketing Nigeria PLC, where she currently works. So please join me to welcome Ms. Chinwe as she introduces us to our speakers and also lead us into the panel discussion. Over to you, Ms. Chinwe.
Thank you very much, Moton. So I welcome you all to the April edition of the TEP webinar series. And as objective for this particular webinar, we have about 5 points of objective. And the title of this webinar is Leveraging Public-Private Partnership to Shape the Future of Education in the African Continent. As objective, we have to discuss the potential benefits and challenges of public-private partnership in the African educational sector and examine strategies for enhancing this collaboration and synergy between governments and the private sector entities and international organizations. Also, we have to explore innovative approaches and best practices for leveraging the PPPs to address specific educational challenges in Africa, as well as inspire action and commitment from participants to actively engage in support efforts at leveraging PPPs for possible positive change in the African education system. So I'd like to give a brief synopsis of what the topic is about: leveraging public-private partnership to enhance, to shape the future of education in Africa. So basically what it's about is that this webinar is going to explore the transformative potential of leveraging the public-private partnership to shape the future of education in Africa. And by fostering this collaboration between government and private institutions and then the various stakeholders, the PPP aims to address numerous challenges facing the African education system. Again, through these partnerships, we're looking at being able to harness resources, expertise, and innovative approaches, how this can be mobilized to improve the education infrastructure in the African continent, especially in underserved communities. Despite the commitment of the public-private partnership, there are still challenges. However, there are some successful examples of these collaborations in Africa, which we're trying to harness this example to see how we can actually implement those in Nigeria and probably explore the adaptability in the African continent. Overall, leveraging public-private partnership presents a promising avenue for driving positive change and shaping a brighter future for education in the African continent. And to join me in discussing these topics today are two seasoned professionals in the field of education that are quite versatile in many other fields that we're going to meet very soon. And in discussing that topic today, I'd like to introduce our panelists, starting with no other than my first panelist, Mrs. Olakpeju Ibekwe. I'd like us to meet Olakpeju Ibekwe. So who is Olakpeju Ibekwe? Olakpeju Ibekwe is a seasoned business leader, filmmaker, and sustainability professional with keen interest in empowerment, youth development, access to quality education, and better healthcare. With 2 decades of corporate experience, she has built expertise in brand and marketing communications, strategy formulation and execution, team management, process improvement, strategic partnership, and business expansion. Olakpeju currently oversees all operations and initiatives at the Sterling One Foundation, a social change vehicle focused on tackling the root causes of poverty in Nigeria. Under this nonprofit, she works with and supports various nonprofits across the African continent in capacity building and amplifying impacts with the foundation's key focus areas, which are healthcare, climate action, youth development and education, gender equality, women empowerment, and food security. Part of her work includes leveraging technology for alternative financing for social impact projects through Africa's first free crowdfunding platform called Giving.ng. Olakpeju also works with the private and public sectors on social impact initiatives and spearheads coalition building between the different sectors through the Africa Social Impact Summit. She sits on the board of the One Health Initiative, where she helps shape impactful policies and initiatives for medical practitioners and everyday Nigerians seeking better healthcare. As a movie producer, she uses her work within the media and creative space to raise awareness about gender issues, especially gender-based violence, while actively supporting young girls through mentorship, providing business advisory for very early stage entrepreneurs, and supporting climate action initiatives in coastal communities. Olakpeju Ibekwe has received various awards in the social impact space, including the Leadership Impact Award in Nonprofit Management at the CSR Reporters Philanthropic Awards on social impact and sustainability practices, and was named InVentures Africa's Top 20 Women of Impact in 2023. Isn't this a very imposing personality? Please make welcome Mrs. Olakpeju Ibekwe.
Thank you very much, Chinwe.
I didn't see any applauses from the audience. Mrs. Olakpeju Ibekwe, we look forward to a very robust discussions with you today on the mentioned topic.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Chinwe.
Thank you. So our second panelist would like to introduce Ms. Tonia Oduimo. I'm so happy to meet Tonia here. I've actually met Tonia and Olakpeju at different platforms. I was surprised to actually meet you here today. So I'm very happy to meet you again here, Tonia. Over a decade, I believe, that we've met and we've known each other. So who is Tonia Oduimo? Tonia is an articulate community development and CSR professional with expertise in indigenous and regional development spanning over 15 years. She has supported various local and multinational organizations, including mine, to redefine their CSR objectives, sustainably design and implement high-level projects, ensuring effectiveness and efficiency in project building, in project budgeting, quality control, and return on investment. She has development expertise in program management, system strengthening, and community development. Tonia has contributed to the implementation of various education and health programs funded by the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, UNICEF, and the UK Department for International Development, DFID, amongst others. In her current role as program manager at Oando Foundation, she leads this team on strategic deployment of the foundation's education and environment-focused initiatives across 23 states in Nigeria. She also champions advocacy initiatives, knowledge management, and high-level stakeholder relations for the foundation. Tonia firmly believes in humanity and the power of positively impacting lives and transforming societies through social development. She continues to impact the sector through her volunteering and advisory services to smaller nonprofits and social enterprises. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Tonia Uduimo.
Thank you so much, Chinwe. Pleasure to be here. To see you again.
You're welcome, Tonia, and we look forward to a very interactive, robust discussions today. So going forward, delving straight into the panel discussions, the theme for this year's Africa Union Summit was Educate and Skill Africa for the 21st Century. And at the summit, 10 roadmap was identified towards achieving the SDG 4 goal, which is quality education. And out of these 10 roadmap that have been identified, we're going to X-ray 2 of those roadmap, which is establishing and strengthening multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder partnership for education, as well as strengthening resources mobilization for increased sustainable financing system, financing and systemic investment in education. So these 2 roadmaps informed the topic of today's discussion, which is leveraging public-private partnerships to shape the future of education in Africa. So with this said, we're going to go into the first set of questions for our discussants, for our panelists. And I'm going to start with Madam Olakpeju. So Madam Olakpeju, from your experience in the private investment and organizational philanthropy in education, what can we say is public-private partnership, and how can private partnership address the infrastructural gap in African schools in a sustainable manner?
Thank you very much, Chinwe, and thank you so much to the Education Partnership Center for inviting me to join this session. And Chinwe, I must really appreciate you for the kind words. You're also an excellent personality yourself.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to participants joining us from different parts of the world. For me, public-private partnership is a model that we have seen grown over the last 2 decades across the globe in a bid to not just solve for education challenges, but other critical issues within the socioeconomy of different governments and subnationals. For us in Nigeria, we see this play up in different ways. One of such ways, which I would like to emphasize, is financing. And when I say financing, I will talk about concessional financing when it comes to education. As someone who has worked in different organizations, including financial services sector, I know of different products and solutions that have been designed by different financial institutions to be able to solve for the problem of education. As a matter of fact, today in Nigeria, there's actually a microfinance bank that only focuses on financing solutions within the education sector, supporting not just the government, but even the private sector and small-scale players within the education value chain and ecosystem. So the first thing that will come to mind where you're talking about where the public sector, which is government, institutions and their agencies, and private sector, which are usually for-profit businesses, duly registered in different economies, and of course, for Nigeria, with the Corporate Affairs Commission, come together to achieve a defined primary goal within the education sector. Specifically, these issues can be around infrastructure, teacher development, operational and working capital for the different schools across the primary, secondary, and of course, the tertiary institution. In African schools, and to ensure sustainability and long-term maintenance, one thing that comes to mind is matched funding. Governments can partner with private companies to be able to co-fund education initiatives And these include infrastructural projects within their different communities for Nigeria's subnationals and local governments. By sharing the financial burden and the expertise, the government can leverage their experience, the speed, the processes that the private sector brings to bear, and of course, the investment. We know about the impact investments that has become a major enabler for sustainable development across economies, especially in our climate development economies in Africa and Nigeria. These can also be done as a public-private partnership model, where over time, the private sector can get their returns back. Of course, this will not be done provided it is not a loan that has market rates. And I'm saying market rates because there's emphasis on concessional financing, because we know that, yes, education is a critical need and is also for the benefit of the private sector in the long run if they invest in education. Secondly, for sustainability is also important for communities to own these initiatives. That's effective stakeholder management for sustainability. And then there's this issue that Tonia and the private sector advisory group have been discussing over time, which is tax incentives. There is no way the public sector alone can achieve our education goals if we want to achieve the sustainable development goals by 2030. Clearly, the private sector has invested over the years when it comes to CSR budget. I'm sure Total Energies has a huge chunk focused on just education. And so many organizations that we have interfaced with are also focused on education as part of their social responsibility investments. And we know tax payment is also an opportunity for funding government initiatives. There is a way that when these tax incentives are applied and made available to the private sector, provided, of course, the funds are used to finance infrastructural projects in education, we can find a lot of investments targeting infrastructure across our country and across the continent. For the sake of our time, I'm going to prioritize just those 3 points. Thank you, Chinwe.
Thank you so very much, Olapeju. You had addressed the issue of infrastructural gaps. I'd like to address this one to Tonia. So, Tonia, what would you say are the key challenges in implementing the public-private partnerships in the education sector, particularly with as concerns equity, access, and quality education, and how can these be mitigated, these challenges?
Thank you very much, Chinwe. I think this is an exciting conversation to have flowing from the African Union Summit. Education is one of those areas where investment is not as heavy as it should be, even though it's one of the key indices for economic development and national development. And the reason is because education, unlike some other investment opportunities, does not yield quick returns. Education requires patient capital, because when you put in money, you expect that the people or the beneficiaries would, over time, develop and then effectively serve your output. So most investments in education tend to scale or to shift towards infrastructure, because investors know that if you invest in infrastructure, chances are I can get my returns quickly. But very little is being said about investment in other areas of education. It's particularly important to see learning improvements, which is the key for us. It's to see children learn better. So what do I see as some of the challenges? Around access, you see that investors want, again, where they can get quick returns. And so concentration will be more around the urban centers that already have, to an extent, sufficient government support compared to the rural areas. And so the rural areas, even though there are PPPs in place, are still not getting as much support as they would have gotten if they were in the urban areas. Another is the case of equity, which again, the urban-rural diversity comes to play. If you do have a lot of people who live in the urban areas, and the essence for, I'm assuming that discussion more around education for those in public institutions or public schools, not so much the private, because government caters largely to those in the public institutions, and the assumption is that they do not have people who find themselves in that space, do not have the funding to access alternate education opportunities like those from wealthier social backgrounds. So if government is unable to provide public resources to cater to the needs of all the beneficiaries within the public school system, you would assume that if the private sector is coming in to augment through a PPP, that it would be, to a large extent, affordable. But what we have seen in most of the PPPs that we can make reference to is that where the private sector comes in to provide or to bridge this gap, using infrastructure as an example, because of the premium that's placed on the service that's being provided or the accommodation type, in the case of accommodation as infrastructure for tertiary institution, for example, it is not affordable. Government type initiative, say hostels that are also in those tertiary institutions, you will find that the hostels from the government will be cheaper, but not as conducive and as functional as the ones that have been set up by the private sector. And so this brings up a huge challenge around access and equity. Again, quality. Most of these PPPs, there are no clear standardized measures for implementation. So if I am to build a hostel, what's the minimum standard that's expected? What's the amount that I can take as charges from students who will be accessing the facility on an annual basis? Am I allowed to randomly increase the cost without consideration for the cadre of people that I'm targeting in this service provision? I think that's another issue. But because we've focused, or Mrs. Olakweju has focused largely on private investment, I want to talk about corporate philanthropy, because they are two different things. So whilst private investment in the form of either impact investing or social enterprises are targeted at both profit as well as impact, corporate philanthropy to a large extent deals with impact. So it is corporate organizations saying, we are, from our goodwill and the abundance of what we have made, we are making this available in addition to other responsibilities that we owe the society and government. We're making this much available to alleviate the needs or to augment government in the areas where it's deficient. And so for those of us in the corporate philanthropy space, our focus is more, how will our investment yield the desired impact? And so you see that we're a bit more lenient in the places where we invest. Investment in this case, you will see us going further to the rural areas where there's need. Of course, I know that there's visibility, there's brand visibility to protect. And so most brands would also want to be in the urban areas. But there's a bit more altruism in the way that the corporate philanthropy works as against impact investing. And when we go further in the conversation, I'll speak more about how incentivize corporate to the extent that we're able to do more and effectively augment where gaps are in government's delivery. But immediate challenges that I see, first of all, it's for equity issues, investment will seem to skew more to the urban areas than the rural areas. There are issues around regulation, issues around funding mechanisms. Government does not, in large instances, de-risk capital, and so most private sector organizations or most private investment arms are not willing to invest in education because they do not see it as profitable, one, and two, they do not see it as quick returns compared to other sectors like telecoms and co. And so investment would always largely be skewed to other sectors than the education sector. I think I'll leave it there for now.
That's quite insightful, Tonia. You have actually dealt some justice to the question of challenges, basically, because what obtains in Nigeria, I believe by extension also applies across Africa, because we have practically the same terrain. I'd like to take the next question from the perspective of your last comments, Tonia. You address challenge, and this brings me to the next question, which has to do with trust. Now, for private investors to invest, there should be some level of trust. I believe so. So the question here should be from, I'm going to Tonia here again. From your experience, what mechanisms can be established to foster trust and cooperation between governments and private sector entities in in the PPP's education to ensure alignment with the goals? And how should civil organizations effectively engage with PPP's initiative to ensure inclusivity and representation of diverse community needs and voices?
Okay, that seems like a lot.
Okay, maybe we could
we'll try to unpack it. First of all,
let's see.
We'll start with the area of trust. Yes, absolutely, trust remains an issue. Accountability and transparency should be the core of any form of partnership. And so it's important that, be it for impact investing or for corporate philanthropy, that there's mutual trust and respect. I'll give an instance, and I learned about this a couple of months back about what's happening in Sierra Leone with their partnership pact that they have. So you spoke about aligning, so trust as it relates to achievement or attainment of the goals and objectives of the PPP. This presupposes that there should be clarity in what the PPP is meant to achieve, and that we do not ever so often have policies and frameworks that change and make it difficult to sustain PPPs or even create or engender interest in PPPs. And so one of the ways that you can build trust is to ensure, first of all, that there's the political will on the side of the government to foster PPPs, not just in words, but in steps or actions that are taken. The first being the policy documents that will drive such PPPs, that they are robust enough to create interest from the private sector. The second for me would be ensuring that government is prioritizing where the need is and not allowing themselves to be, in quote, bullied by the private sector to where they think the value is, because the objective for both will never be the same. And I'm wearing my civil society hat as I'm saying this, not my private sector hat, okay? It's important that that's clear, so that, yes, whilst we are interested in PPPs, we want to ensure that the PPPs achieve the objective, which is to meet the gaps that exist in the services that government is meant to provide. Another area that I think is in the monitoring mechanism around and funding mechanism around PPPs. So for monitoring, it's not just enough to say, we've signed the document, this is what you're meant to deliver, go ahead and deliver it. Efficiency and effectiveness is key if PPPs are to succeed. They are time-bound in most cases. And so you want to ensure that if what the PPP is meant to achieve is support, again, I always go back to infrastructure, even though it's unfortunate because infrastructure is not the greatest need in education, but that's the easiest example because most of the PPPs, that's where they are tilted to. But where that is the case, are there monitoring mechanisms in place on the part of government to ensure that the PPPs are living up to expectation? And this brings me to the case of corruption. Would you allow the private sector do what it is meant to do freely without inhibitions? Would you allow it to do the work in such a way that it's able to achieve the target with the amount or the cost stipulated and not try to cut corners because it needs to satisfy ulterior longings of personnel within the system? This is another critical area that needs to be addressed. I think another area is allowing also the private sector organizations to introduce new technologies. Sometimes these contracts have been signed for PPPs, and there are technologies that come up that will ensure greater benefits for the outcome that we intend for the PPP, even after the contracts have been signed. Will the contract be lenient enough to allow those new technologies to be introduced? Because ultimately, remember, the outcome is impact. We're looking at being able to achieve the aim of the PPP. Another area that I think we need to look at is results-based financing. A lot of private sector organizations and even development partners are moving closer to result-based financing. So I want to finance, but I want to ensure that the funds are towards targeted results, not input. So input is critical, but I'm not just paying for input. I want to ensure that the money that I'm making available delivers to me the results that I need. And this is speaking outside of infrastructure for things like learning outcomes. So if as an organization, I determine that I want to support, for example, improving learning outcomes for children in a particular target area, and so my interventions will be supporting maybe teacher capacity strengthening, supporting digital access to digital technology in the schools, access to materials. If that's what I want to support, it's not just enough. If that's what I want to fund, it's not just enough to make the money available. It's how do I tie my funding to the results that I intend to see at the end of the PPP. For civil society, I think the relationship between the civil society and the private sector has been largely transactional, unfortunately. There is an unequal balance. When the civil society looks at, and I can say this because I've worn both hats. When the civil society looks at the private sector, they see people who have money that they can use to implement their social initiatives. When the private sector looks at the civil society, in some cases, not in all cases, there have been issues around mistrust of funds that have been made available. There are capacity issues with delivery of assignments. And so they would rather just say, take this money, go do X, Y, Z. And so civil society is more interested in holding government accountable than they will be in holding private sector accountable, because the relationship between the civil society and the private sector is skewed. And so if civil society is to play an effective role in not just checkmating, but in being a useful participant in the PPP arrangement, I think they need to wake up to their advocacy responsibilities. They also need to ensure there's something that I'd like to mention here, and it's something that Education Outcomes Fund, one of the financing alternatives that has come up for the education sector most recently in the past couple of years. They've done some work in, I think, Sierra Leone and Ghana, and they're looking to come into Nigeria. One of the things that they're looking at doing is, for impact investors, private sector organizations that want to support social initiatives that where there gaps exist between what government is doing and what should be done in the education space, they are creating a model that allows private sector to support or to fund indirectly civil society organizations that have social initiatives tied to education, but may not have the capital to execute these social initiatives that they have or education initiatives that they have. The private sector organization comes in as an impact investor to make capital available for the civil society organization to be able to deploy those education initiatives that have been pre-agreed. And when the results are achieved, Education Outcomes Fund repays the private sector. So it's like an investment, but you're investing for impact to the extent that the result is achieved. So putting it simply, if we say we're going to 20,000 children in Lagos State, for lack of a better example, out of school children are brought back to school, and that they improve their proficiency in literacy and numeracy over a 5-year period. Education Outcomes Fund, and this is just using Education Outcomes Fund as an example, because it's one of the funding or financing mechanisms that's currently available, will work with a private sector organization to support civil society organizations that have strong evidence-based solutions to deliver such an initiative. Well, not alternatively, at the end, when the result is achieved, the Education Outcomes Fund provides the funding that the private sector has invested. So what the private sector is doing is front-loading funding or making funding available for the civil society to be able to execute, because it doesn't have the funding to execute. However, when the results are achieved, Outcomes Fund repays. I think this is an excellent model, one of the models that the civil society can latch onto, in addition to their advocacy work, to keep everyone on their toes, both on the government side and the private sector side. I think I'll stop here for now.
Wow, Tonia, this has been a no-holds-barred edition you have given us, with lots of options and ideas for the government to adopt to ensure that the future of education is guaranteed in Africa, not just in Nigeria. Someone just said fantastic, and I believe it's actually fantastic. Thank you very much, Tonia, you've done quite some justice to the two questions and unbundled them quite effectively. And taking it from your perspective, I'll move on to Mrs. Olakpeju at this point. Mrs. Olakpeju, Tonia had addressed the issues of what governments can do to be able to close up these gaps. Now, from your own experience as a CSR expert, can you kindly help us to provide examples of successful public-private partnership models that have effectively improved teacher capacity building and professional development across the African continent? Then after that, maybe I would have liked to take the second question, but let me get this perspective first. That's from Mr. Olakpeju.
Thanks, Chinwe. Is that question for me?
Yes, sorry. That's from your experience in CSR. Can you please provide examples of successful PPP models that have effectively improved teacher capacity building and professional development across the African continent?
Okay, thank you very much, Chinwe. And in my experience, you can realize that several countries have actually explored this PPP model to boost not just teacher development, but also infrastructure and the curriculum of education within their climb. I know this has happened in Uganda, but specifically I'll be speaking to the Bridge Kenya. And I really like this model because the Bridge Kenya works closely to complement government efforts, particularly in underserved areas, using technology and innovative approaches. You understand that the Bridge Kenya came in when there were several issues in the Kenya educational system. And working with the Kenyan government, this was a model that was used with the Bridge Kenya. And today, that PPP model has provided significant support, not just for teacher development, but also including curriculum and access to education, providing equity and quality education in underserved communities in Kenya. So this goes back to the first point that I think Tony already alluded to, policy and political will. Where there is no political will and policy by the government, any PPP model is bound to fail. One way or the other, it cannot be sustainable. So Bridge Kenya helped the Kenyan government to establish the relevant policies, the guidelines within which they could work to support the existing public school system. And beyond that, they now went on to join in the implementation. So it is not just providing the technical capacity, they also ensured there was implementation of that. Really, it's something that can also be implemented in other places within the continent. The
African continent.
The reversal out of school in Nigeria and other parts of Africa. In Nigeria here, I know of Sterling Bank. Sterling Bank has a partnership with 1 million teachers to provide free teacher training with over 250 internationally relevant models for teachers across Nigeria. And different state governments have also bought into this model and exposed the solution to their teachers. I know as at the last time I checked, about over 200 teachers have already leveraged this platform because the platform is actually for free and it can be accessed anywhere across the country. These kinds of models can always be further deepened and scaled across the country. And to the point, teacher capacity building is extremely important, especially to guarantee learning outcomes. But PPP models can not only focus on teacher capacity building. The other elements across the education value chain also have to be paid attention to for effectiveness and sustainability. So can this work? Can PPP models work in Nigeria and Africa? We have different examples to show that worked in the past. And will they work in the future? I think there is no better time than now, being the African Union Year of Education, for different governments to intentionally identify areas where there are gaps, institute the right partners to ensure that these solutions are sped up and implementation is done effectively with transparency, with accountability and the right governance structure, so the right outcomes we desire are achieved. Thanks, Chief.
Wow, thank you so much, Olapiju. So you have tried to give us a sample of the an idea of what the models are across Africa, giving us the Kenyan model and then the Nigerian model. How do you think PPPs can leverage technology and digital solution to enhance access to quality education in remote or underserved areas? Having given us this model, how do you think they can now leverage technology and innovative solutions to ensure that the underserved areas are reached? Same to Olapeju.
Thank you.
Deriving
very
from
much.
your last analysis.
Okay, thank you very much, Chinwe. Being deployed by 1 million teachers is one model. And how can this be done is about last mile partnerships to ensure that the relevant infrastructure for access to this technology and digital solutions are available in the rural areas across the country. We're in Lagos, and we know that each local government, they have provision for these solutions. 1, 2, identifying the right technology partners is the first thing that has to come to mind. I am aware that Microsoft has a goal to provide digital skills for 5 million youth in Nigeria over the next 5 years. This is an existing strategy, and Microsoft already has requisite funding for it. The government can just align with such a partner. So first, partner identification, strategic partner identification is one of the ways that people
Sorry, I think Olapeju's network is a bit unstable.
and digital solutions to enhance access, education, focused students. I am also aware that Co-Creation Hub has various innovative homegrown solutions that are designed to address our unique problems in Africa. These solutions can also be investigated and harnessed and scaled across the continent. The point I'm making is that in some areas, we don't need to go outside Nigeria or outside Africa. There are several innovations within the continent that can be utilized, invested in, and scaled to address our unique problems and solutions, and provide solutions. Interestingly, I am also aware this was a conversation that is ongoing, and is an ongoing proposed partnership, emphasis on proposed partnership between the Ekiti state government and Sterling Bank. And what is the solution? It is a comprehensive management information system to ensure that there is adequate data across the different levels of government on the education sector, from primary to know those that are supposed to go to secondary, to those that are supposed to go for the tertiary education. What does this do for the government? It ensures that there's quality, current, and usable data available for decision-making, planning, and funding for the education sector in the state. And this is a proposed partnership between a private sector organization and a public sector organization. So these solutions exist. It's about the research, the political will already established, the models and structures and policies around it, identification of the right partners, and the right plan implementation. And at the Sterling One Foundation, we believe in galvanizing partnerships. So we're glad to work with different organizations that want to do this. Thank you, Chief.
Wow. Thank you, Madam Olapeju. You've actually opened our eyes to lots of innovative and listed solutions. So from your submissions here, what I can make out is that there are lots of solutions available in the African continent. It's just for us to actually harness or latch on these solutions and actually implement them. Thank you very much for that. So I'm going to go back to Tonia now. So Tonia, can you please tell us the approaches and policies that are needed to facilitate the operations of PPPs in education while safeguarding against potential risks and ensuring accountability? Now, this still has to do with the implementation.
Okay, I think I would switch back again and wear my corporate philanthropy hat this time. I'll give an example, speaking about PPPs that can can be effective. I want to just give an example of something that we've done. I'm sure you know over the last decade, the foundation, Rwanda Foundation, has been implementing the Adopt a School model. And currently we've kind of transitioned slightly, but I just wanted to give an example in case there are other private sector organizations listening, models that are not, this is talking about corporate philanthropy. If you're seeking to do it for public good and impact is your bottom line, this is an approach that can be utilized. So for infrastructure development, and again, because our target is basic education, the initiatives that we've implemented are targeted more at the basic education level. So we realized when we started implementing the Adopt a School that most of the projects, infrastructure projects that we implemented, we had to bring contractors from Lagos because we wanted to guarantee quality. We wanted to ensure that the buildings were standard. We had a brand to protect. So all of that weighed into what we were willing to do, and weren't willing to compromise on quality. So we thought, well, the best thing to do was to bring the contractors all the way from Lagos to come implement the projects in the various rural locations where we had our adopted schools. But, you know, over time, we realized that sustainability-wise, this wasn't a sustainable model. So if you bring in contractors, first of all, you're depriving the local community residents opportunity for economic opportunities that they should tap into by the reason of your projects being there. Secondly, because of the standard that you've set, government may not be able to maintain or sustain the project or the building that you've provided post your intervention. And so we started asking ourselves questions. And thankfully, there were a couple of development partners who were already implementing SFIN Education Sector Support Program in Nigeria was a useful resource for us at the time. We started seeking out alternatives to contractor-led infrastructure projects. And that's how we came up with the community-based renovation model. And the simple question we asked ourselves were, in these communities where you're operating, do people live on trees? No, they don't. They live in houses. Who built their houses? Have the houses they live in, has those houses, have they collapsed on them? No, they haven't. So why then do you think that they will not be able to provide, or they will not be able to have structures that their children can learn in? And so we revised our model in our adopted schools to carry the community on. So what simply working with SUBEB Works Department, and SUBEB is the State Universal Basic Education Board for any of the states, we identified the project, first of all, working with the school to identify the infrastructure need, then with the State Universal Basic Education Board to come up with the building specifications as well as the bill of quantities, and then recruiting local, be them masons, carpenters, to commence the building projects, and then have a site engineer to support them. What did this do for us? It significantly reduced the cost. So whereas we were having a block of 6 classrooms at the time for 22 to 24 million, working with the community-based partners, we were able to get it down to, I think, was about 7 to 9 million thereabouts. And these were solid structures. So with what we were doing with contractors for 2 buildings, for 1 building, we could now do 2 buildings and provide more access and more classrooms for these children. So for corporate philanthropy, for private sector, please, if you're listening, if there's any private sector organization listening that's interested in altruistic funding for education, not impact investing or not investing for profit, this is one model that you can look into. You are able to do more. And one of the things that we also found was there was an added advantage. When we worked with the community members to build, The community members took responsibility to mobilize children who were out of school in the communities to come to school, because now they are now seen as core stakeholders in the process. And so it is our school, it is our building, our children must come. So there's a higher level of involvement and participation that you get as an advantage for that. But speaking directly to what policies are possible, I want to talk about what we're doing with the Private Sector Advisory Group. And the Private Sector Advisory Group is a platform or an arm of the private sector, organized private sector, that helps to support various SDGs, working with the Office of the Senior Special Advisor to the President on SDGs. And one thing we're trying to push is, especially for private sector organizations that tilt largely to corporate philanthropy, how can we incentivize private sector to do more than they're doing currently? So if I'm already doing CSR initiatives as a private sector organization, what's the incentive for me to spend more money? I already have an amount that I've earmarked. Why should I spend more? And we're saying there are different ways that government, who is the core beneficiary of social initiatives from the private sector, there are different things they can do to incentivize private sector to do more. And one of the initiatives that we have realized, and we have started actively consultative engagements with government, is the tax credit scheme. And what is this? I'm sure most of you must have heard about the infrastructure tax credit scheme, where firms such as Dangote and Co will build roads and get tax credit in return. As much as infrastructure is critical to national development, so also, or even more so, is education. And so if such can be done for the infrastructure space, why can't it be done for education? Of course, it can be done. It's just structuring it in such a way that it's not deceitful, it's not double dipping, it's not private sector trying to take advantage of resources that would have otherwise gone to government, but it's private sector's way, it's the government's way of incentivizing private sector to do more than it is currently doing. Because it's possible. A lot of these private sector organizations pay billions in taxes to government. And there's actually, the UNDP has an initiative that's targeted to this. It's called Tax for SDGs. So it is ensuring that the tax that is being paid is targeted at achieving setting SDG goals, setting SD goals. And one of those goals is education. And so how can the government work with the private sector by incentivizing them? Private sector already brings discipline, because there's the private sector discipline that we have. It comes with technological know-how, comes with a wealth of resources that it's willing to deploy, but it requires collaboration and cooperation from government to be able to effectively deploy this. And one of the effective ways is through this tax credit scheme. Imagine a situation where from the taxes that would have been paid, say 10% of it is rechanneled or redistributed to support specifically basic education across 700 local governments as a pilot. And this is on the average 100 million per school. Imagine what 100 million naira would do for a public primary school. Just think about it. And this is targeted on one school, not lean distribution of resources, but targeted at one school. And it's an overall holistic improvement. It's from teacher development to infrastructure support to education technology to all round. This is one key way that we think government can immediately incentivize private sector to do more. And this is not to say private sector will not continue to do its corporate social responsibility initiatives. Of course we will, but incentivize them to do more, because it's possible to do more. Indonesia, for example, it's a country like Nigeria, similar population size. One of the things I learned when I traveled for an exchange visit there that was supported by the World Bank, one of the things I learned is the private schools in Indonesia are supported by the government. Because for them, they see the private schools not as competitors, but as partners in progress, that the children in the private schools are our children. And so to the extent that we're able to provide support for if it's teacher remuneration, or if it's infrastructure support, or just the monthly stipend that they give for school management, monthly school management, if we make this available, then the standard that we have in the private schools will not differ significantly from what's in the public schools, because there's cross-pollination. They have a standardized assessment and quality control system within the country. So both the private schools and the public schools, there's a lot of cross-pollination. So parents are not thinking, let me take my child to a private school, because the quality you get from the private school equals the quality you get in the public school. And that's the standardization that they have created as a nation. And it's improving the education sector significantly. Why can't we replicate that? We have a lot of low-cost private schools in Lagos, for example, and most of those schools are, for lack of a better word, the quality of learning that's happening there is sad. But it is assumed that children are going to school. Most public schools are doing way better than those low-cost private schools. But government can, through a PPP, support private sector to incentivize those low-cost private schools and bring them up to standard so that the quality of learning is standardized across board. So I think there are many policies. These policies are not up in the air. Many of them are readily available. The question is political will. Is government willing to do what needs to be done? And is it willing to follow through? And not with every change in government comes a change in policy and a change in... If there's consistency and private sector sees the willingness on the part of government, I don't think the policies that would drive it would be a problem. We have sufficient for the education space. We do have sufficient. The problem is in implementation, effective implementation.
Wow, Tonia, this topic, you have done so much justice to the questions. You actually dissected it with local examples and instances of what is happening in Nigeria, and then trying to link it to Africa. I am very impressed with the content of knowledge you have, the depth of knowledge you have in the subject. Thank you very much for this in-depth analysis. I'll get back to Peju at this point again. Tonia had actually briefly touched the issue of government incentives and on the private sector investment. I would have loved to throw that same question to you, but I believe you may have one or two more things to add. But if not, I could go to your next question in case you have a few more things to add on the government incentive for the private sector investors on PPP.
Thank you very much, Chinwe. What I would like to emphasize is not just about government incentives. It's more about intentional partnerships within the private sector. And here's why. We find a lot of silo execution within the private sector on innovations within the education space, where the private sector can intentionally come together as an organized body to solve these solutions, like Tonia mentioned, not necessarily just for profit in the immediate or later, but altruistically. I think there is no better time than now in this African Union year of education. So my call to the private sector is for intentional partnerships. And these partnerships don't need to have all the private sector organizations under one body, not necessarily. But organizations that have their businesses located in a certain area can intentionally state that over the next 1 year, every school within this environment will be supported when it comes to their infrastructure. So every school within your locality or your community where you've chosen to do your business activities, within that community, we will not find a school that has an infrastructure issue. Within that community, every teacher is going to be in line with global best practices and standard. Within that community, every school will have a standardized water, sanitation and hygiene facility. That is my call, because yes, tax incentives may come and may not come as quickly as we want them to, but there is no better time than now, because there's something about economies of scale. Those in business understand this very well. By the time 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 organizations or try to do what only one organization was doing before, it eases the burden on organization A. And organization A, B, C, D, E are able to all achieve their strategic goals and objectives, deliver value to their different stakeholders, including their shareholders. So what I'm talking about now is actually excellent for business. And I'm emphasizing excellence for business because we all understand that profit-driven organizations actually have a mandate to their shareholders when it comes to return on investment. So that is my call at this time. How can you work together, organizations within the same locality, to scale the impact of the good work you already do? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you so very much, Olakpeju, for adding more weight to that clarification from Tonia. So I'd like to also take you again, Peju, on the issue of intellectual gap. There was a study in the Q4 of 2023 and Q1 of this year that there are jobs, but employers found out that there's an intellectual gap beyond their requirements and what is available in the job market. So my question here is, how do you think PPPs can close this gap by ensuring that the supply, that the demands of the industries meet the intellectual capacity of graduates from that are available to bridge this gap in the education industry?
So I'm just going to, I really, really like this question. Why? Because I've had different conversations around it with the Association for Development of Education in Africa. And we also see it in our climb. When you want to hire a staff, you realize that you also need to retrain that human resource to be able to deliver the kind of value you require in your business. I have had these conversations also with several human resource leaders, and it is already part of their processes. The quality of human resource we get from the tertiary institutions, we already know they are not necessarily fit for purpose. So there are different curriculums within organizations to make this human resource fit for the purpose we require them for in our organization. Of course, having some basic other educational requirements. It is not sustainable. There has to be intentional stakeholder engagement, connecting the town and the gown. And when I say the town and the gown, I mean the marketplace and the institutions, educational institutions, providing the workforce required to ensure sustained economic value for our various economies, especially within Nigeria and across the continent. With the youngest population across the globe in Africa, that is critical. It's not just a Nigerian issue. Across the continent, there has to be intentional engagement between the marketplace and the institutions with influence on the curriculum providing those human resources. And in some cases, even you can find some of the business leaders also being part of the faculty. We already see this happening in our business schools, but we need to scale it down beyond our business schools. It should now go down to the other publicly owned institutions. Beyond this, there also has to be current research on what the marketplace needs. And this also needs to inform what students choose to study when they are writing JAMB and choosing the course of study. So you go to school and you learn zoology. Nothing against, with due respect to all those that learned zoology. If we require more health workers, my inclination would be to ensure that more students choose health-related courses. Do you understand, Chinwe?
Yeah.
More students choose health-related courses to be able to ensure that the gap for health workers over the next few years is blocked. So we ensure that we do not have limited supply, because we can see that the demand is increasing. I'm mentioning health workers because we've already seen a lot of exodus of health workers, not just from Nigeria, but different African economies to other locations. Now is the time for us to solve for that problem we can already see happening in the next few years. So it is not just about engaging the institutions, but also to the basics of, okay, what do you choose to study in the university? Is there a supply need for it in the next few years? If there's no supply need for it, then maybe we should start revisiting and re-engaging those opportunities to ensure that we are building a human capital system that ensures that our human capital needs over the next few years are met. And these are conversations that we've had, and we're looking to further deepen with the educational institutions, and also see how we can work with human resource bodies to be able to ensure that these things do not end as talk, but also actually are implemented across the educational institutions in the country. Thank you, Chinwe.
Thank you so very much, Peju. From your final analysis here, I can see that you talked about retraining, conscious effort in bridging the intellectual gap to reduce intellectual deficit, enhancing the employability skill for school leavers, and probably when they are still in school, and as well as ensuring that we review probably the school curriculum to probably scrap the relevant courses and push further for the more marketable courses, going by the contemporary needs of industries today. On this note, I'd like to formally end the discussion session, and we go to the question and answer session. We have just 15 minutes to do that, so we can round up. Madam Peju, I'd like to say you have done quite some justice to this last subject, which I actually surprisingly have a passion for, because from my end here, we have things similar to that to actually create employability skills for school leavers.
Awesome.
So thank you very much for that.
Awesome. Thank you, Chinwe. Thank you,
So
Chinwe. And we may be able to work together on it. We can talk after the session.
Of course, yes. So I'd like to get back to the host so we can get some questions for the panelists. Thank you. I'll hand over to Mosu at this point.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Ms. Chinwe, for brilliantly moderating that panel discussion. I have been writing and writing and writing and writing. It was really, really, really robust, I must say. So yes, there's the Q&A box. I think I would would you want me to take the questions, or you want me to read them out to you? And I don't know.
Depending on the questions, if I can see the questions, I could match some, because we have just about 10 minutes to actually round off, so we can address the audience input as well. So you can
Okay,
read them
so-
out.
Okay, so one of the questions says, investments in education may not yield immediate return, but how can investors be convinced of its long-term benefit to nations building? And then the other one says, can anyone mention key indicators, models, reports, platforms to measure social investment or initiative for education in Nigeria, especially for digital literacy in tertiary institutions? And this
Okay,
is
well, so I think what we can do is to address the questions one after the other. So let's take the first question for Tonia. If Tonia could address the first question.
Okay, do you want me to read it again?
Yes, please.
Okay. So it says, investment in education may not yield immediate return, but how can investors be convinced of its long-term benefits to nations building?
I don't know about convincing an investor, and I see Mrs. Ibekwe laughing because as a financial person, she knows that investors want their returns when they want their returns, and if they are competing opportunities that tend to provide higher returns, it makes business sense for them to jump at that. So something has to be driving them beyond profits for them to be able to make such call. And one of the ways that I have seen this work in other climes is government subsidy. And government taking on largely a healthy portion of risks. One of the reasons why they don't invest in education is actually the risk. So if you invest in an education project, be it infrastructure or even the software components, in the event that I do not get what I desire or what the outcome should be for me to be able to begin to yield returns on my investment, in the event that that doesn't happen within the time frame that has been stipulated, my lenders are like, how do I pay? Or even in constructing the project, there are other unintended issues that may come. That's not the way to address it. How will government step up? So if government wants increased funding or increased investment in education, it needs to significantly, and I say this significantly, any social development project that's in line with what they've itemized and the nation sees as a priority, GPE will match that 1-for-1. So if an investor is willing to invest a certain amount, but is scared that he or she may lose the investment, one of the key ways that they can provide, that you can provide succor, or you can provide peace in the heart of the investor, is to leverage these other funding opportunities that help to de-risk whatever capital it is they are investing, so that it gives them peace. But ultimately, investors will not come to education if it is not bankable. Bankability is the key language here. Education is patient capital. Investors are not patient people. And so they must see value in it beyond you just saying, oh, it's for social good. Yes, it's for social good, they know, but they have a business bottom line, a profit bottom line. So government will need to significantly subsidize where they need to, tax incentives where possible, subsidize. So for example, I know that there private sector organizations, not speaking specifically about investors now, but private sector organizations who, in the multitude of social good that they do, there's the fifth schedule that allows them a certain form of tax incentive. That's a benefit, an added benefit for them to continue to support. And if education is their CSR focus, then it means education is getting more funding from that private sector organization. So I think those are the little, but there's no hack to it. The only hack that I've seen is patient funds that are being provided by external or internal institutions that are set up to subsidize or augment what government is providing, or any other partner that is willing to support the sector, the education sector. And GPE has excellently modeled this, and the other organizations too that are modeling it. But government can do more through subsidy, tax incentives, and levies, subsidizing levies that otherwise investors would have paid for various parts of the process, of the PPP process, helping to subsidize it so that they are interested in spending a lot more. I know there are some organizations in the past, I can't remember which of them now, but I know there were some organizations in the past where if you come into the organization and they train you and give you certain exposures, you are committed to spending a certain number of years in the organization before you are allowed to leave. As unfortunate as that sounds, that's one of the ways to get returns on their investment. So again, investors are investors. There has to be benefit for the investment. There has to be profit for whatever it is they're investing in. So government needs to do a lot more to incentivize them to come to the space.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tonia, for that. I think I will just, there's another question for you in the question and answer box. I'll direct it.
Sorry, Moto, I'd like to ask that we just round up in 2 minutes. So we probably will be able to take one more question. And the other questions could be answered and sent, if you don't mind. So this question came from, sorry?
No, I said for sure.
Okay. So I think I'd like to take the question from, sorry, Solomon Okonkwo. Sorry, Solomon says that brings in a multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder collaborative approach. I believe more discussions on that. No, sorry, not his own. I'm not seeing the questions box very well. Okay, from Adeolu. Adeolu says, can anyone give the key indicators, models? This goes to Madam Peju. Can anyone give key indicators, models, reports, platforms, or platforms to measure social investments or initiative for education in Nigeria, especially for digital literacy in tertiary institutions? I don't know if we're able to address that question in 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, so I would quickly mention that when it comes to investing in education, that's to take it from the last question. There are organizations, I already mentioned that there's a bank in Nigeria that all they do is invest in education. The point I'm making is, as much as education might need patient capital, there are very profitable means for investors to make money from education. I also know, I can also speak for Sterling Bank. Sterling Bank actually has a strategic focus on education as a business model for profit. And that is actually a new way for sustainability in financing. It guarantees that funding will always go to those innovations. 1, 2, on key indicators, models, reports, and platforms to measure social investments or initiatives for education in Nigeria. Interestingly, as we speak, I do not know of any comprehensive platform that provides data on digital literacy in tertiary institutions in Nigeria. And when I say digital literacy in tertiary institutions, I am thinking of all public and all private sector focused or owned tertiary institutions across the country. However, I know that I can speak about the Africa Social Impact Summit, where innovators and the UNDP would also be coming to share data on how Nigeria is faring concerning different SDG-related indicators, including education. And that's happening July 25 to 26 at the Eco Convention Center this year. So you may want to come there and also meet other organizations that are focused on providing real-time data on the education sector in Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Madam Peju. I think this one is for Madam Tonia, but from the organizers, Motu, do you think we can take more questions or they could be addressed because our time is actually up?
I think we could spare 1 to 2 minutes for that question.
Okay, I think it's for Tonia. from Solomon Okonkwo. Or do you have a different question here to address? This is the one I have here.
No, just that. I think we're running out
Okay,
of
so
time.
the question says, Tonia, do you think the community should be added to this model? So we have a PPCP. I don't know what PPCP here means. Okay, a private partnership community, private public community partnership, I guess. Do you think it's viable? I know we had strong community schools in the days in rural areas. So Tonia, Solomon is asking, do you think the model of having a public-private community partnership is possible? Is it viable?
I do not know about the change of name, and I think that's just nomenclature. But in actual implementation, in the approach, in disbursement of the approach, the community is carried along. So there, I'll just use the example of the primary school. So every school has this school-based management committee that's made up of the community representatives across the key community groups. So the traditional ruler, religious rulers, women group, youth group, artisans that make up the school-based management committee for each school. And all of these members are people living within the community. And the implementation of the community-based renovation model that I spoke about earlier was largely spearheaded by the SBMC. So identification of people to work with, local artisans to work with, to even the funding, the SBMCs had to set up accounts and funds were transferred to them, but before then we built the capacity of the SBMC. We had training sessions, practical training sessions on budgeting, on resource mobilization, on advocacy, just to strengthen their capacity. This may seem like a lot of work, but it yields a lot of benefits. So I don't know about changing the name. All of that is nomenclature. In actual implementation, a partner or an investor can determine that he wants to work with the community, even if it's not what has been standardized by government. It can be a decision that an investor chooses to make if it sees value in it.
Absolutely.
Thank you so very much, Tonia, for that last question. And on this note, I'd like to thank our panelists for having done so much justice to this topic that I wish we can actually expand beyond this platform. And I know we can. So on this note, I'd like to sign off and say thank you to the panelists as I hand over to the organizers. Motu, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chinwe, once again. Thank you so much for brilliantly moderating that panel discussion. And so our amazing panelists for your robust, bringing your robust expertise and experience and doing justice to that topic. I dare say that this is one of my best and favorite webinar. And of course, I'm being biased because it's one of my favorite topics. So thank you so much. And for those who we couldn't, take your questions because of time, we're really sorry. If you could just direct your questions to us via our email at info@tepcenter.com, and we'll sure, respond to your message, to your questions via the email. So thank you so much once again to everyone who joined. Our participants were very, very engaging. Thank you so much. So our next webinar will be on the 29th of May with the topic Advancing Inclusive Education in Africa. So please anticipate it. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues at work to join the next webinar we'll be hosting. It's going to be very, very exciting, just as this one that we've held. Also, to learn more about our work and other upcoming events, you can follow us on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Instagram at TEP Center. So we have the same Instagram handle, the same Twitter handle, the same LinkedIn handle at TEP Center. No dots, no underscore, it's just TEP Center. And I'm sure my colleague will also drop the link in the comment section below. So thank you so much once again for joining. See you same time next month. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye,
Pedro and Tonia.
Thank you. Great to see you, Chinwe. Take care. Great to see
Thank you
you.
so much. Thank you so much, Tonia.
Thank you so much, ma'ams.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.